Let's have a talk, let's have a chat, talking about a little this and that. Hello and welcome to another episode of This and That. I am your host, Mary Easterling, and today we are going to continue with Offbeat. But before I begin, to listen to anything else from This and That, go to talkingaboutthistandthat.wordpress.com and click on the podcast link. Folks, there was this Fox News interview with Stephen Miller, who is possibly the real power at the quote-unquote Resolute desk at this time, ? I wonder why it's not the VP, if indeed POTUS is having some form of health issue, as pundits in the YouTube sector suggest. Sadly, the anchor of Fox News did not shut up and let the man rant. So, this is from the YouTube transcript. I read, so quote, If you give me the floor for 30 seconds, let me tell you what we're doing here, Jake. All right, this will be Miller talking to Jake is the talking head, the Fox News anchor, okay? The United States, this is sort of foundational. The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It is absurd that we would allow a nation in our backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us, to hoard weapons for our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States. Sovereign countries should be able to do what they do, the Monroe Doctrine. And the Trump Doctrine is all about securing the national interest of America. For years, we have sent our soldiers to die in deserts in the Middle East to try to build them parliaments, to try to build them democracies, to try to give them more oil, to try to give them more resources. The future of the free world, Jake, depends on America being able to assert ourselves and our interests without apology. This whole world that happened after World War II, where the West began apologizing and groveling and begging these honor ellipsis, end quote. The Fox newscaster did not let this man rant, so we never hear the full thought. But he mentions the Monroe Doctrine, so here we go, folks. This is going to be all about the Monroe Doctrine, and then what this man was talking about. You can find all of this on Wikipedia, because that's my source. Alexander Hamilton, writing and I'm quoting this. This is, I just copy, paste. So I am quoting Wikipedia here. Quote, unquote, all right? Alexander Hamilton, writing in the Federalist Papers, was already wanting to establish the United States as a world power and hoped that it would suddenly become strong enough to keep the European powers outside of the Americas, despite the fact that the European countries controlled much more of the Americas than the U.S. herself. Hamilton expected that the United States would become the dominant power in the New World and would, in the future, act as an intermediary between the European powers and any new countries blossoming near the U.S. Continuing with the quotes, according to Samuel Eliot Morison, as early as 1873 then, the United States adopted the policy of isolation and announced its intentions to keep out of Europe. The supplementary principle of the Monroe Doctrine that Europe must keep out of America was still over the horizon. So in other words, we're not there yet. But this is the seeds to it. So full stop a moment. A dominant power in a new world? This is Alexander Hamilton. Hey, Alex, are you seeing what this has become? Dude, hammy baby, we're not loving this. But despite the United States' beginnings as an isolationist country, the foundation of the Monroe Doctrine was already being laid almost immediately after the end of the American Revolution. Now, yes, we needed to have some form of something in place because at the American Revolution, we're just in our infancy. We're not even a toddler yet. And there were a lot of European backers that kind of sidled up to us to help us over the humps and the bumps. But they also wanted to invest in South America. We didn't have secure borders. Mexico wasn't any man's land. Texas? What's that? We're a bunch of people on the East Coast, and all this West is just, hey, we don't have borders. Anything can come up from the bottom or the top. And, I mean, Canada. Je me souviens. Parlez-vous the français? We want to speak the français? No. We want to understand español? Solamente? Speak the Spanish only? No. We like our English. We were British. Now we're American. The accents changed. The words have sort of changed. To thumb it to the British, we changed our colloquial phrases, but still, we speak English. A nod to our British heritage. What? Now, here's the Monroe Doctrine as Wikipedia puts it forth. The Monroe Doctrine is a United States foreign policy position that opposes any foreign interference in the Western Hemisphere. Originally concerning European colonialism, it holds that any intervention in the political affairs of the Americas by foreign powers is a potentially hostile act against the United States. The doctrine was central to the American grand strategy in the 20th century, and we'll get back to that. President James Monroe first articulated the doctrine on December 2nd, 1823, during his 7th annual State of the Union address to Congress, though it was not named after him until 1850. At that time, nearly all Spanish colonies in the Americas had either achieved or were close to independence. Monroe asserted that the New World and the Old World were to remain distinctly separate spheres of influence, and thus further efforts by European powers to control or influence sovereign states in the region would be viewed as a threat to the U.S. security. In turn, the United States would recognize and not interfere with existing European colonies or meddle into the internal affairs of European countries. Okay, look at that again. We're the New World, and we talk about New World Order, and all the Christians go, it's a one world order, and the Antichrist is going to come up out of it. No, it's a new world ordering the whole world. Oh, wait, I'm getting ahead of myself again. All right, fine. Because the U.S. lacked both a credible Navy and Army at the time of this doctrine's proclamation, it was largely disregarded by the colonial powers. While it was successfully enforced in part by the United Kingdom, who used it as an opportunity to enforce its own Pax Britannica policy, Peace of Britain, Pax Britannica, the Peace of Britain, the doctrine was ignored several times over the course of the 19th century, notably during the Second French intervention into Mexico. Alamo, anybody? That's why we did it. Texas? Annexed. Mexico lost a chunk that day. We're a Lone Star state because we're just one of many. Oh, and we were the ones that got our state with blood, sweat, and was there money involved? I don't know. Anyway, by the beginning of the 20th century, the United States itself was able to successfully enforce the doctrine, and it became seen as a defining moment in the foreign policy of the United States, and one of its longest-standing tenets. It has been invoked by many U.S. statesmen and several U.S. presidents, including Ulysses S. Grant, Theodore Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and is being substantially reinterpreted in the 2020s by Donald Trump. This is Wikipedia, and they're getting it, and they're getting their updates. So this is good. And it continues. After 1898, the Monroe Doctrine was reinterpreted by lawyers and intellectuals as promoting multilateralism and non-intervention. Those are two things that need to be defined. In 1933, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. So Teddy wasn't the only Roosevelt who dealt with this doctrine, so did FDR. Under FDR, the United States reaffirmed this new interpretation. Oh wait, this is not the Monroe Doctrine anymore as it stood. It's a new interpretation. Pay attention to that, because those are two words you want to pay attention to. When your Constitution has a new interpretation, it's how do we apply it that changes. Ice, anybody? Through co-founding the Organization of American States. Into the 21st century, the doctrine continues to be variably denounced, reinstated, or reinterpreted. Organization of American States. First off, I want to say something. South America is not South America. We're kind of brash to take the entire continent and name it after Amerigo Vespucci and call it America. But that's what we've done. We're the people that do that because the Spanish people don't call this the Americas, I don't think. I mean, somebody tell me, does Venezuela think that it is Venezuela of America or Venezuela in Venezuela? In the southern tips of a continent. Does South America see itself as South America? Or does North America, the 48, see them as South America? Yeah. Chile, Bolivia, Ecuador, do they all see that? Are they Americans? No. They're their own entities on the continent. It's like the English and the Welsh. Okay. Now, there's a problem with this, and it's an opinion, a doctrinal statement of how the country or the leader of it felt about the surrounding area. Well, on the one hand, no, we really don't want Europe colonizing South America close to our borders and posing a credible threat to our national sovereignty, which is also our security to operate as our Constitution sees fit. But to use this to take a leader from another country, it's not protection of us, but rather it's global expansionism. We are having trouble just caring for the lower 48. How many more mouths do we really want to feed? How bad for our healthcare system that we are struggling with right now if we start acquiring other regions for this concept of becoming the owners of all the region from the southern tip of South America to Cuba to Canada, and of course we do own Alaska. This is the quote-unquote Donroe Doctrine, as in Donald Trump's interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine. As some media talking head put it, or as some YouTuber put it, Donroe Doctrine. But in the days that it was promoted, we were not strong militarily. Now we are, so we need only police our borders and develop a better system for handling said borders. The idea of colonizations from Europe post-World War II was the quote-unquote absurd moment, because are we not in the UN and NATO? Why would they want to become a threat to us when we are their allies? No, this is using something that had in its day a safeguard for our borders and become a protective buffer to meddling with the affairs of other independently sovereign nations like Venezuela, which was a Spanish colony, before gaining its independence from Spain and then from Gran Colombia to be its own country as a republic in 1830. Hence, here this doctrine is non-applicable. To use it to justify taking Greenland, which is not in our hemisphere, is another quote-unquote absurd moment. But look back to the transcript of Miller's rant. Quote, the United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. Unquote. Superpower? Military securing of our interests? These places are their own interests. But then the next sentence, quote, it is absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become a supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us, to hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States, end quote. What's this all about? BRICS. Venezuela has all this oil, etc. They're selling it to Russia, to Cuba, and Iran, apparently, and we have a sort of quote-unquote war. It's nothing more than an ideological war with these entities. But we want their stuff. This is a land grabbing, and we think that Putin is bad? We just did to Venezuela what Putin's been trying to do to Ukraine. The idea of the seeds of this doctrine was to be in isolation from Europe because they were bigger than we were. It's the your thing is bigger than my thing, but our thing grew. So now we have a big thing. Why would we fear Europe's things? But this is not about protection. It's about expansion. MAGA doesn't want to improve this nation. It wants to own the hemisphere. And if we layer the Christian element of nationalistic Seven Mountains mandate to to not only influence but own and control religion, family, education, government, media, arts and entertainment, business. We have a bid for a new national order. We're the new world. Europe is the old world. So when they start talking about new world order, they mean we own the world, starting with the Western Hemisphere of it. It's not a republic, certainly not a democratic republic. We are a democratically run republic, not a simple democracy. But this would call for a dictatorship that ran all the venues of the social system of this nation and controlled its information networks, not to make the profanity disappear, but to create a new society. The woman that got shot was LGBTQ, and the quote-unquote wife was another woman making good the husband. So the shooter that called her a lesbian was correct. That's what she was. But LGBTQ is merely the new black. That's right. Since LGBTQ agenda and lifestyle and religious expression, quote-unquote sparkle theology, is not the same exactly as standard biblical Christendom, they are the sinners, but they are seen as the evil, unwanted sinners that, quote-unquote, we will purge from, quote-unquote, our midst. That, folks, in Scripture is clearly defined as Jesus's prerogative. It's his choice, not ours. This is, as I have said, is the tares on parade. This is Antichrist. But then again, the tare culture is also known as the serpent seed. They are not his, but they say they are. Scripture talks about those who went out from among us to prove that they were never, quote-unquote, of us to begin with. This is that. In this section of the Wikipedia article, it's called the Doctrine. Full document of the Monroe Doctrine, written chiefly by future presidents and then Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, is long and couched in diplomatic language, but its essence is expressed in two key passages. First is the introductory statement, which asserts that the New World is no longer subject to colonization by European countries. The occasion has been judged proper for asserting as a principle in which the rights and interests of the United States are involved, that the American continents, by the free independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. You're quoting. That's kind of that's all right. The problem is we keep saying they're part of us. We keep calling the continent America, and it's not. We gave it that name. All of the indigenous peoples and cultures that are down south of us have different names for this continent. Are we paying attention to that? No. We're saying in essence, we own them. Are we feeding them? Are they paying us taxes? No? All righty. The second key passage, however, I will say, this is actually a good idea. If they get their independence, they should not be recolonized, and by this extension, possibly not be annexed either, like we're doing to Venezuela, or did we? Is this an annexation or an attempt to colonize? It certainly was an invasion. The second key passage, which contains a fuller statement of the doctrine, is addressed to the quote-unquote allied powers of Europe. It clarifies that the U.S. remains neutral on existing European colonies in the Americas, but is opposed to quote-unquote interpositions that would create new colonies among the newly independent Spanish-American republics. Again, that's not bad. That's good. It protects our lower border. Yes, thank you. We owe it, therefore, to candor. This is talking again about the Monroe Doctrine. We owe it, therefore, to candor and to the amicable relations existing between the United States and those powers to declare that we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. Their part would be Europe's part. With the existing colonies or dependencies of any European power, we have not interfered and shall not interfere. If you're a colony of Spain, we're not going to try and free you. If you get free, we're going to tell Spain they're free, don't recolonize, or it might be seen as an act of war against us. That's basically what this is saying. But with governments who have declared their independence and maintained it, and whose independence we have on great consideration and on just principles acknowledged, we could not view any interposition for the purpose of oppressing them or controlling in any other manner their destiny by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States or a declaration of war against us, the U.S. The problem is, look at the language. If the European peoples are still colonizing the land, then we don't interfere. If the land gets its power base up and makes a coup and pulls it off and ousts the colonizers and manages to become a self-sustaining sovereign entity, then any attempt to reestablish colonialization will be seen as a threat to us. We don't say we won't help them to maintain their independence if asked to, but we won't meddle until they are independent and staying so. So again, in a way, this is fine because we're protecting our lower border, kind of, sort of. All right. Monroe's speech did not entail a coherent and comprehensive foreign policy. It was mostly ignored until proponents of the European non-intervention in the Americas tried to craft a cohesive, quote-unquote, Monroe Doctrine decades later. And it was not until the middle of the 20th century that the doctrine became a key component of the U.S. grand strategy. There it is again. Now, let's look at this thing called grand strategy. Before I go there, though, I want to touch on why we think we should have Greenland. Here's that history, because we did have it for a little while. During World War II, the U.S. invoked its Monroe Doctrine and occupied Greenland to prevent use by Germany following the German occupation of Denmark. All right, wait a minute. Denmark has Greenland. They're not quite in our hemisphere. Denmark got taken by Germany, so we took Greenland to protect it. However, once the German thing was done and Denmark got itself back on its feet, Greenland went back to Denmark. NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. The U.S. military remained in Greenland after the war, and by 1948, Denmark abandoned attempts to persuade the U.S. to leave. The following year, both countries became members of the NATO military alliance. In 1951, treaty which gave U.S. a significant role in Greenland's defense. As of 2025, the U.S. Space Force maintains Pituffik Space Base in Greenland, and the U.S. military frequently takes part in NATO exercises in Greenlandic waters. So that's why we think we can own it. But Denmark owns Greenland. At that time, NATO did not exist, so we were safeguarding Greenland. We, however, have a, quote-unquote, Space Force space base in Greenland. And that is why Musk is trying to get the new Starlinks up. Why Hegseth wants Grok AI, which is Musk's little thing for X, in the military. All our private social feed is now militarily available, perhaps. But this then means they are as asset to control us. This means that this thing is an asset usable by the military to control us. As in, we now know where you are, knock, knock, bang, bang. And I'll say it again, if you think that you're a citizen of the United States and it's going to save you, no, they can simply wipe your citizenship, say all your papers are bogus, and still deport you to God knows wherever they want to. And you'll never be seen again. And if you're a Christian and God commands you to something that gets you into this deportation, you have paid the price. You have proved your allegiance to God. But your kids will never see you. You're done. You die. That's it. Thought I would throw that in there because that too has come. Then under FDR, we had this quote-unquote good neighbor thing. All of this is on Wikipedia, so you go look there. The ideas were non-intervention and non-interference in domestic affairs. We would be the quote-unquote good neighbors and trade. And this means that our foot is in their door via our business interests, like Venezuelan oil. We invoked Monroe Doctrine to help Mexico get its independence. We also then took from it a piece called Texas. But this ended. the good neighbor policy ended. It ended with the ramp up of the Cold War in 1945, as the United States felt there was a greater need to protect the Western Hemisphere from Soviet influence. No, that's not what it was. The Soviets were getting a little too big for their britches, and we were starting to sweat. We were insulating ourselves with north and south of ourselves. Now, we bought Alaska from Russia. Now we've got our little continent. But we want all of that hemisphere, the continent and all the islands and everything. And if Greenland is in our hemisphere, well, we're going to own that too. That's what they want to do. Do that and you break NATO. Do that and nobody will trade with you anymore. But hey, who cares? The bull, the stock market, she'll die quick, fast, and in a hurry. Oh, boy, yeah. Okay, these changes conflicted with the good neighbor policy's fundamental principle of non-intervention and led to a new wave of U.S. involvement in Latin American affairs. Control of the Monroe Doctrine thus shifted to the Multilateral Organization of American States, OAS, founded in 1948. Organization of American States. This is the deal of everyone is the American continent. But notice that it is America that is the principal player. North and South, America, meaning that the USA thinks it actually can own all these lands. This is the thing that is happening right now. This is where Miller gets off on his rant. Without the good neighbor policy, we can meddle anywhere we want. Right now, this is the ideology, except we invaded Venezuela. So here's the next key shift. The Kerry Doctrine. Secretary of State John Kerry told the Organization of American States in November 2013 that the quote-unquote era of the Monroe Doctrine is over. Several commentators have noted that Kerry's call for a mutual partnership with the countries in the Americas is more in keeping with the intention of the policy's namesake than the policies that were enacted after Monroe's death. So, in 2013, before Trump, we were no longer Lord Protector, as it were, of this hemisphere. This is a good thing, but it didn't last. As soon as Trump came in, we got this. America first and Trump corollary. Donroe Doctrine and American expansionism under Donald Trump. President Donald Trump implied potential use of the doctrine in August 2017 when he mentioned the possibility of military intervention in Venezuela. It is 2026 and we've done it. Thank you. After CIA Director Mike Pompeo declared that the nation's deterioration was the result of interference from Iran and Russian-backed groups. La 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 la, ding 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 ding. No, we played with OPEC. OPEC played back. Venezuela under Chavez had done something wonderful with their oil, and they were just fine. But when we played with OPEC and OPEC played back, Chavez and Venezuela and the oil there lost its shirt, and the monies and the fundings and the ability to do what was being done there died. That's how it got bad. Tell the truth. Go Google it. Go find out what the facts actually are. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. In February 2018, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson praised the Monroe Doctrine as, quote-unquote, clearly a success, warning of, quote-unquote, imperial Chinese-trained ambitions and touting the United States as the region's preferred trade partner. Pompeo replaced Tillerson as Secretary of State in May 2018. Trump reiterated his commitment to the implementation of the Monroe Doctrine in the 73rd UN General Assembly in 2018. Russian permanent representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, criticized the U.S. for what Russia perceived as the implementation of the Monroe Doctrine at the 8,452nd emergency meeting of the UN Secretary Council on January 26, 2019. Venezuela's representative listed 27 interventions into Latin America that Venezuela considered to be implementations of the Monroe Doctrine and stated that, in the context of the statements, they considered it, quote-unquote, a direct military threat to the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela. Cuba's representative formulated a similar opinion. Quote, the current administration of the United States of America has declared the Monroe Doctrine to be in effect, unquote. But this is not for protection, it's for intervention to turn economic boons toward Russia away to the U.S. of A. March 3rd, 2019, National Security Advisor John Bolton, who is now being picked on by Trump, invoked the Monroe Doctrine in describing the Trump administration's policy in the Americas, saying, quote, in this administration, we're not afraid to use the word Monroe Doctrine. It's been the objective of U.S. presidents going back to President Ronald Reagan to have a completely democratic hemisphere, unquote. Bolton is now being indicted by Trump for all the negative light in his book, which has portrayed the man, Trump. So then how do you think this statement of his has fared for him? Not well. But wait a minute. Democratic hemisphere. That's we own the hemisphere. It's the United States of the Americas, because Cuba and all the South American countries are now states under Washington, D.C. Oh, and we still want Canada. All right, Frenchies, we want you. Jay, you love your sovereign. No, you're going to love us. We're your sovereign now. Oh, I'm telling you right now, that's not going to fly. And the Prime Minister said so. Good for him. Stand up to us, Mr. French Prime Minister of Canada. Please do. Don't let us take you. That's not nice. Trump's determination to treat the Western Hemisphere as a U.S. sphere of influence has been characterized as a revival of the Monroe Doctrine. Problem is, it's not the Monroe Doctrine. You just read what it was. This is nothing like that. The final draft of the 2025 National Security Strategy called upon the United States to, quote-unquote, reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American, i.e. U.S., preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. But that's not the Monroe Doctrine. That same document announces the quote-unquote Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Foreign policy experts describe the move as a desire to divide the world into quote-unquote spheres of influence between the United States, Russia, and China. Where's Europe? Hey, France, Belgium, Italy, Pope! Oh, Popey! Pope! Hey, Rome! Where are you? Has Putin eaten you yet? Because you realize if we get this, he gets that. And China gets its piece too. All of Asia. That's what we're doing. The big three. Okay, fine. Moving on. And American officials later explained the strategy in those terms, that we would have spheres of influence. Spheres of influence. Hogwash. Spheres of ownership. We're not influencing you. We own you. You're ours now. You're our source for enriching our pockets. We, the oligarchs, have spoken. Okay. Trump's large-scale naval deployment and military strikes against alleged drug boats in the Caribbean were described by experts speaking to Reuters and the BBC as examples of gunboat diplomacy. There's a thing for you. The designation of drug cartels as terrorist organizations and Trump's promise to land-based military strikes were described as providing a legal rationale for possible military action and regime change in Venezuela. Oh, it's 2026 and we just did that. Oye, Maduro, how's it going? Are they treating you well? ¿Está bien? ¿Y tu esposa? Gosh, I hope so. In 2025, the New York Times noted that, quote-unquote, top Donald Trump administration officials have been explicit that their overarching goal is to assert American dominance over its half of the planet. Following the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January 2026 raid, Trump claimed that the action was an application of the Monroe Doctrine, stylizing it as the quote-unquote Donroe Doctrine, and telling reporters that, quote-unquote, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Look at that line. Foreign policy experts describe the move as a desire to divide the world into quote-unquote spheres of influence between the United States, Russia, and China, and American officials later explained the strategy in those terms. Russia and China are Axis powers. We're allies. Well, we were. Yeah, two are Axis and one is Allied. Interesting. Europe can't be happy with this. No, it can't. They're sweating because if we do this in our hemisphere, Putin's going to do that in his, and they're all clickbait. Look at this line. In 2025, the New York Times noted that top Donald Trump administration officials have been explicit that their overarching goal is to assert American dominance over its half of the planet. Buried in the article is this little gem. December 2nd, 1845, U.S. This is the Wikipedia article on the Monroe Doctrine. This is the gem. December 2nd, 1845, U.S. President James K. Polk announced that the principle of the Monroe Doctrine should be strictly enforced, reinterpreting it to argue that no European nation should interfere with American Western expansion, also known as manifest destiny. Now, manifest destiny from Wikipedia was the expansionist belief of the 19th century United States that American settlers were destined to expand westward across the North America, and that this belief was both obvious, quote-unquote manifest, and certain, quote-unquote destiny, so obvious and certain, manifest and destiny. The belief is rooted in American exceptionalism, romantic nationalism, and white nationalism, implying the inevitable spread of republicanism and the American way. Where's the democracy? Where's the voice of the people? It isn't there. Look up the definition of a republic. You'll be surprised. Democracy is sewn into it. Go Google that word. What is a republic? Go Google it, and artificial intelligence will answer that for you in its summary statement, and then show you some websites where you can go read about it. Okay. It is one of the earliest expressions of American imperialism, white nationalism and American imperialism. We did go west and manifested our destiny to land grab occupied lands from their residents, the Native American nations. This is a rooted ideology of Americanism, just like Rome. According to historian William Earl Weeks, there are three basic tenets behind this concept. Manifest destiny, the assumption of the unique moral virtue of the United States, the assertion of its mission to redeem the world by the spread of Republican government, and more generally, the quote-unquote American way of life, the faith in the nation's divinely ordained destiny to succeed in this mission. Basically, what he's trying to tell you is, we sit and preach the gospel to you, unwashed, uncircumcised, hell-bound heathens. Problem is, the gospel is not the American way of life. It's the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we've been doing that. That's a manifest destiny. It's obvious, and it's certain. You're supposed to go talk about Jesus and live him everywhere. Oh, wait, that's love your neighbor as you love yourself? Oh, never mind then. Never mind. Not never mind. Why aren't you doing it? Church. The moral was white Christianity, not biblical, but Judeo-Christianity. Something else that isn't biblical. Judeo-Christianity is not the way. Paul made sure that the way broke from Judaism for a reason. Old covenant done. Old covenant expression done. New covenant expression begun. It all goes back to Jesus and through Jesus to the Father and not temple. The circumcision is internal, not external. Therefore, Gentiles are not bound by anything more than James' edict. Go to the book of Acts and read it. As long as you're doing that, you're not doing so bad. And yes, we're not under Torah law at this time because it's not enforceable. No temple means you can't enforce the Torah law. Sorry. Once the temple starts back, pretty city, New Jerusalem, Torah law will be enforced again. God gets to reinterpret Torah law as he sees fit. So, all you Torahists, be careful. God will reinterpret that because Jesus changed all the dynamics on the cross. Europe. Now, the moral was white Christianity, not biblical, but Judeo-Christianity. Then the idea was to exert our government over all the land of the 48. Go west, young man. This is a divinely ordained thing. That is the thing you need to pay attention to, because right Right now, this is being done in our government, and when Trump is gone, if Vance gets in, this could be a coup that makes January 6th impotent. Here's more of the ideology. From in his influential 1776 pamphlet Common Sense, Thomas Paine echoes this notion, arguing that the American Revolution provided an opportunity to create a new, better society. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present has not happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand. Again, the rhetoric, new world. It's not one world order. It's us owning the world. Get it through your thick skulls, people. The rhetoric is right under your noses. NWO is United States of America owns planet Earth. Oh, Bibi, are you listening? We're coming for you, too. Yeah, Zionism? No, we'll own Israel. And we'll rule out of Jerusalem after we bulldoze Al-Aqsa Mosque. We'll build a brand new White House right there. Call it our pretty city and say, okay, Jesus, come on! The kingdoms of this world now belong to you. No, they don't. They belong to whoever becomes the king of the world. Oh, wait, isn't that Antichrist? You betcha. Power to begin the world again. Folks, the church screams about New World Order. There are two sides, and until this moment, I looked at the evil and said the blurring of national boundaries was bad, and it is. This is far worse. I went off script. I'm back on script. This is also inherently a new world order, but USA is the world, just like I said. Into this, I also bring this, the city on the hill, and its interesting interpretation by a Puritan. This scripture was cited at the end of Puritan John Winthrop's lecture or treatise, A Model of Christian Clarity, quote unquote. Delivered March 21, 1630 at Holyrood Church in Southampton, before his first group of Massachusetts Bay colonists embarked on the ship Arabella to settle Boston, Southampton in England. Quoting of Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 5:14, in which Jesus warns about the city on the hill that cannot be hidden. Winthrop warned his fellow Puritans that their new community would be as a city upon a hill, the eyes of all the people are upon us, quote unquote. Meaning, if the Puritans failed to uphold their covenant with God, then their sins and errors would be exposed for all the world to see. Quote, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world, quote unquote. Now, there is a call in the church to shine the light on the red letters of the Gospels and the teachings of Jesus, and in his body we are the city the world looks on, but we are a spiritual kingdom right now. All attempts to be anything more is risk. See where this goes, from Puritan to politic. January 9, 1961, President-elect John F. Kennedy quotes the phrase during the address delivered to the General Court of Massachusetts. I have been guided by the standard John Winthrop set before his shipmates on the flagship Arabella 330 years ago. They, too, faced the task of building a new government on a perilous frontier. Quote unquote, we must always consider, he said, quote unquote, we shall be as a city upon a hill, the eyes of all the people are upon us. Today, the eyes of all the people are truly upon us, and our governments in every branch, at every level, national, state, and local, must be as a city upon a hill constructed and inhabited by men aware of their great trust and their great responsibilities. For we're setting out upon a voyage in 1961 no less hazardous than that undertaken by the Arabella in 1630. We're committing ourselves to tasks of statecraft no less awesome than that of governing the Massachusetts Bay Colony, beset as it was then by terror without, disorder within. History will not judge our endeavors, and a government cannot be selected merely on the basis of color or creed, and even party affiliation. Neither will competence and loyalty and stature, while essential to the utmost, suffice in times such as these. For of those to whom much is given, much is required. All right, you could laud this. and say this is a plea for better governance. And it's honest, but there's more to it. In his address, it behooves us to look that up. The ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country is also JFK. But then he was a very progressive president. November 3rd, 1980, Ronald Reagan referred to the same event and image in his election eve address, A Vision for America, quote unquote. He is reported to have been inspired by author Manly P. Hall in his book, The Secret Destiny of America, which alleged a secret order of philosophers and created the idea of America as a country for religious freedom and self-governance. I have quoted John Winthrop's words more than once on the campaign trail this year, for I believe that Americans in 1980 are every bit as committed to that vision of a shining city on a hill as were those long ago settlers. These visitors to that city on the Potomac do not come as white or black, red or yellow. They're not Jews or Christians, conservatives or liberals or Democrats or Republicans. They're Americans, awed by what has gone before, proud of what for them is still a shining city on a hill. Reagan would reference this concept multiple times in multiple speeches. Again, he would reference it, notably January 11, 1989, in his farewell speech to the nation. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city, built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. City with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. If there had been city walls, the walls had doors. The doors were open to anyone with the will and heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. Sounds wonderful, idyllic, harmony, peace, etc. But we find Reagan in the Monroe Doctrine as well, but it's not. He's just as much a part of the expansionism, and as an actor, his wording was more deceptive. Remember, they called him the great communicator. However, the quote's nice. Too bad Donald's not abiding by it. A wall with doors. That's open border policy and an immigration process that can handle the influx. Barack Obama, U.S. Senator, made reference to the topic in his commencement address June 2nd, 2006 at University of Massachusetts in Boston. It was right here on the waters around us where the American experiment began. As the earliest settlers arrived on the shores of Boston and Salem and Plymouth, they dreamed of building a city upon a hill. The world watched, waited to see if this improbable idea called America would succeed. More than half of you represent the very first member of your family to ever attend college in the most diverse university in all of New England. I look out at a sea of faces that are Afro-American and Hispanic American and Asian American and Arab American. I see students that have come here from over 100 different countries, believing, like the first settlers, that they too could find a home in this city on a hill, that they too could find success in this unlikeliest of places. That doesn't sound bad, does it? In 2016, Mitt Romney, Republican nominee in the 2012 election, incorporated the idiom into a condemnation of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. His domestic policies would lead to recession. His foreign policies would make America and the world less safe. He has neither the temperament nor the judgment to be president, and his personal qualities would mean that America would cease to be a shining city on a hill. You know, that's prophetic. Because what are we right now? Wait, if the city's on fire, can it still be said to be a shining city on the hill, like it's burning down? Oh, that'll work. During the 2016 presidential race, Texas Senator Ted Cruz used the phrase during his speech announcing the suspension of his campaign. President Barack Obama also alluded to President Ronald Reagan's use of the phrase during his speech at the Democratic National Convention the same year, as he proposed a vision of America in contrast to the Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. 2017, former FBI Director James Comey, oh, where have you heard that name in the news, used the phrase in testimony before Senate Intelligence Committee on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. His words are, ellipsis, we had this big, messy, wonderful country where we fight with each other all the time, but nobody tells us what to think, what to fight about, what to vote for, except other Americans, and that's wonderful and often painful. But we're talking about a foreign government, and that, ellipsis, tried to shape the way we think, vote, the way we think, we vote, we act, ellipsis, assumed they're going to try to run it down, dirty it up as much as possible. That's what all this is about. They will be back because we remain as difficult as we could be with each other. We remain that shining city on the hill, and they don't like it, quote unquote. It gets better. We're abusing that phrase, by the way, at this point, because the shining city on the hill is the body of Christ, not a national entity. Hello. November 10th, 2020, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo uses the phrase while delivering an address at the inauguration of Ronald Reagan Institute Center for Freedom and Democracy. Ellipsis, I am equally confident that America will overcome any challenge from communist China to terrorist regime in Tehran, because that's what free people do. We come together, we solve problems, we win, they lose, and we execute our foreign policy confident that we are the shining city on a hill. Here's the issue. You say city on a hill and link it to the Bible, and you're talking about body of Christ. The light in the darkness of sin. The city is his people in the midst. The light is his word in the midst. It's spiritual, but they romanticize this to something else, and it can be used to evoke the neo-church, the neo-Christendom, linking it to manifest destiny of this nation and seeing it as divine. Question mark? A potent, poisonous brew to the world. But then again, they are not his. The last book talks about this type of rhetoric gone off the rails. The minute you take the spiritual and try and insert it into the global context of politics, you're no longer a Christendom. You are an anti-Christendom. Now, I'm going to touch back on the grand strategy. This is out of Wikipedia. There is no universally accepted definition of grand strategy. One common definition is that grand strategy is a state's strategy of how means, military and non-military, parenthesis, close parenthesis, how those means can be used to advance and achieve national interests in the long term. Grand strategy expands on the traditional idea of strategy in three ways. Expanding strategy beyond military means to include diplomatic, financial, economic, informational, etc. Means, ways and means, like Ways and Means Committee. How are you going to do it? The means to get the job done. That's what this is talking about, means. 2, examining internal in addition to external forces, taking into account both the various instruments of power and the internal policies necessary for their implementation, conscription, for example, parentheses open and close. 3, including consideration of periods of peacetime in addition to wartime. Wow. All the means are to take over this hemisphere. And once we have that, we just keep going. The United States of planet Earth, under God so-and-so. Because once you own the Earth, you have become a god. Thank you. Now, look at the first line there of expansion diplomacy, but also financially, economically, informationally. And if you're thinking of Seven Mountains Mandate, that encompasses these areas. So a Christo-political expansionism of diplomacy of the church states, its economics and media, including the watching of social media and elimination of all dissenters, and that means all biblical Christians. Thought I would throw that in. And yes, I'm going to keep linking this together because that's what's happening. That's what's come into power. It's just that it's falling apart because our nation isn't designed to host it. No, and also somebody else is going, excuse me, you're ahead of me. Nobody goes ahead of me. I am God, and I'll decide when that regime comes into power and where on the planet it comes into power. Go read the last book. You'll find out, because it does say where it is. And it ain't here. Doesn't mean that we can't ride the back of it and party hardy until God lowers the boom. Okay, so let's return to the grand strategy. The conversation around grand strategy in the United States has evolved significantly since the country's founding, with the nation shifting from a strategy of continental expansion, isolation from European conflicts, and opposition to European empires in the Western Hemisphere in its first century, to a major debate about the acquisition of an empire in the 1980s, culminating in the conquest of the Philippines and Cuba during the Spanish-American War, followed by rapid shifts between offshore balancing, liberal internationalism, and isolationism around world wars. The Cold War, that's us versus Russia, saw increasing use of deep onshore engagement strategies, including the creation of a number of permanent alliances, significant involvement in other states' internal politics, and a major counterinsurgency war in Vietnam. With the end of the Cold War, an early strategic debate eventually coalesced into strategy of primacy, culminating in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The aftershocks of this war, along with an economic downturn, rising national debt, and deepening political gridlock, have led to a renewed strategic debate centered in two major schools of thought: primacy and restraint. The key words are primacy and restraint. Restraint first. Proponents of a grand strategy of restraint call for the United States to significantly reduce its overseas security commitments and largely avoid involvement in conflicts abroad. Bring them home, boys. Wasn't that what Trump was going to do? America would take advantage of what Posen called a remarkably good, quote-unquote, strategic position. Quote, the United States is rich, distant from other great powers, and defended by a powerful nuclear deterrent. Other great powers are at present weaker than the United States, close to one another, and face the same pressures to defend themselves as does the United States, unquote. Proponents of strategic restraint argue, consistent with the realist tradition, that states are self-interested and accordingly will look out for their own interests and balance against aggressors. However, when possible, states prefer to, quote-unquote, free ride or, quote-unquote, cheap ride, passing the buck to other states to bear the cost of balancing. In other words, our security and our outreach. That's what I'm going to go with because I'll be honest with you, I did not look that one up. Balancing. It's the internal and out and external forces. We want to trade with you, but we want to maintain our borders. That might be an example of balancing. But that's okay, fine. Restraint proponents also emphasized the deterrent power of nuclear weapons, which tremendously raised the stakes of confrontations between great powers, breeding caution rather than rewarding aggression. Restraint advocates see nationalism as a powerful force, one that makes states even more resistant to outside conquest, and thus makes the international system more stable. Restraint proponents also argue, drawing on thinkers like the Prussian strategist Karl von Clausewitz, that military force is a blunt, expensive, and unpredictable instrument, and that it accordingly should only be used rarely for clear goals. You know, Clausewitz, you've got it, because the military budget in the United States is going through the roof. ICE is just, maybe has exceeded it. I don't know. But that is a military incursion on our soil, by the way. I mean, how many people have been dealt with now that are citizens? We're not even going to talk about the people who aren't. It's one thing to get rid of those who are criminals and predators. They do need to be bounced. We don't need that element here. It's not safe for anybody else. Rapists, drug traffickers, people who are bringing harm, but people who are here to try and get in here to work, to be law-abiding citizens, and could become taxpayers? Really? And then when you do this to your own United States citizens, oh, but see, that's going to end pretty soon, because they're going to start saying, well, see, they weren't a citizen after all. And the families are going to start suing and saying, where did you take my kid? Where did you take my father? Where's my mother? What did you do? They are a citizen. They were a citizen. And then, of course, they'll get the knock on the door and they'll disappear. And more and more voices will get silenced unless somebody on high shuts this down. Bring Christian nationalism's Seven Mountains mandate into this, and oh, you have a horrible mix. I'm getting ahead. Restraint is distinct from isolationism. Isolationists favor restricting trade and immigration and tend to believe that events in the outside world have little impact within the United States. On the one hand, Donald Trump's strategy is isolationist, close the borders, forget the world. As already noted, it is sometimes confused with non-interventionism. Restraint, however, sees economic dynamism as a key source of national power and accordingly tends to argue for a relatively open trade system, meaning open borders. Some restrainers call for supporting this trade system via significant naval patrols. Others suggest that the international economy is resilient against disruptions and, with rare exceptions, does not require a powerful state to guarantee the security of global trade. Now, if I read this right, it's not closing ourselves off to the world, but not overly involving ourselves in the world, but partnering perhaps with the world to keep the peace of the world so that we don't go to war. Isolationists call for closed borders, restrict immigration, and this is ICE going after the illegals in one respect and their dragnet in another. Restraint is what Democrats like. It's what we have had, open trade, albeit in some ways selective. They tend to use deterrent instead of force, so the military wasn't overly used. And Donald said he was going to take the military and bring it home. Now he's taking the military and turning it on us, and he just sent it into Venezuela. He wants to send it into Greenland. Now let's look at primacy. Primacy is what we are doing right now. Primacy is a grand strategy with 4 parts. Military preponderance. Ding. Reassurances and containment of allies. Ding. Integration of other states into U.S.-designed institutions. Ding. Limits to the spread of nuclear weapons. Oh, wait, didn't we make Ukraine give up its nuclear weapons? So now it doesn't have a deterrent against Russia? So whoever did that to the Ukraine was using primacy instead of restraint. Restraint would have said, yes, Ukraine can have a stockpile, but it had better not be using itself, that stockpile, aggressively. Hopefully you won't have to use it defensively either, Zelensky, or whoever else gets in power somewhere along the line. This is where we are now. Combining it with the concept of Seven Mountains Mandate that takes on a religious, divinely appointed destiny to try and take over the world is where we could go. And there is more. As a result, primacy advocates that the United States pursue ultimate hegemony. Hegemony. A hegemon is a king, a suzerain, a boss, a chief, an emperor, a monarch, a god. That's what hegemony is. Theocracy is a hegemony. God is the hegemon. Ask Google what else a theocracy is or what it isn't. And then ask yourself, its expression, however, is kind of interesting. Oh, wait a minute, we did that. Talking about this and that on WordPress.com, and we did that. We talked about that. Go look it up. So the advocation of primacy is that the United States pursue ultimate hegemony and dominate the international system economically, politically, and militarily, rejecting any return to bipolarity or multipolarity, and preventing the emergence of any peer competitor. Therefore, its proponents argue that U.S. foreign policy should focus on maintaining U.S. power and preventing any other power from becoming a serious challenger to the United States. That includes you, Europe. With this in mind, some supporters of this strategy argue that the U.S. should work to contain China and other competitors rather than engage them. In regards to humanitarian crisis and regional conflicts, primacy holds that the U.S. should only intervene when they directly impact national security, more on the lines of a selective engagement than collective security. It does, however, advocate for the active prevention of nuclear proliferation at a level similar to collective security. The nuclear bomb is the best damn deterrent that was ever invented. Nobody wants to see their skin rotted off. Nobody wants that kind of cancer. That's why Russia and America haven't gone to war. because we both have nukes. And every time somebody gets a nuke and says, I'm now nuclear enabled, don't mess with me, America goes, no, 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 no. Iran did it, and we screamed. Iraq, I don't know. You know, if everybody had a nuclear stockpile, wars would start to end real quick because we would all be sweating that dadgum button. Of course, who gets in power? Have they lost their marbles, and then do they press the button and start the end of this world? Do you think God is going to stop that? He's the button. He presses his own button. Book of Revelations. That's the penultimate button, folks. Go read it. Like I said, take over the world. And yet what we have here is an all-out strategy that wants to use technology as its thing to bring the West under our power, as in United States of America and United Western Hemisphere. There's also now a thing called the Council of Peace, and Trump is head of it. That's going to come out on the news. In the end, it's not Trump I'm watching. It's the power play itself. And that will do it for this episode of This and That. Until then,